Ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to talk about global warming. It's been in the news recently, and because of what scientists call global warming, they predict a big freeze, an ice age for Europe and northern North America. Gary Stearman is here with the story.
And JR, it's being called the big freeze. Now, before you laugh, just listen to this. In the January 25th, 2004 UK Independent, published all over the United Kingdom and Europe, this sentence was a front page news item, and I quote, "Britain is likely to be plunged into an ice age within our lifetime by global warming," new research suggests. A study which is being taken seriously by top government officials has uncovered a change of remarkable amplitude in the circulation of the waters of the North Atlantic. Well, this raises a lot of questions. An ice age? Global warming? How in the world does global warming fit together with an ice age? And do you believe in global warming? Well, we're going to be talking about that and about some interesting prophetic notes on today's Prophecy in the News.
Okay, Gary, let's find out exactly why they are saying that a big freeze is coming to England and to northern Europe. It all has to do with the polar ice cap melting, doesn't it?
It does. And JR, before we go any further on that, I think everybody has heard about global warming. Some people scoff at it. Some people say, well, it's politics. Some scientists say, well, there's no such thing as global warming. But JR, they're trying, what the climatologists are trying to do today is make sense of the temperature changes they're seeing. And they're trying to understand why it is that the ice is melting both at the South Pole and the North Pole. And there is still confusion about whether the temperature is rising that much in the oceans. But one thing's sure, the ice is disappearing at the South Pole and at the North Pole. And JR, because of that, the water at the poles or in the region of the poles is being infused. That is, the seawater is being infused from glacial melt, causing the seawater to be less salty near the poles.
So fresh water is being dumped into the North Atlantic from the melting glaciers. This fresh water is blocking the flow of salt water from the tropics. Now, please try to get this. As I understand it, the salt water sinks and it goes down deep.
Yes.
And it takes the mild climate temperatures from the equator and conveys them up around the northern areas, which provides a mild climate for Great Britain and northern Europe.
Yes.
And I guess also the east coast of Canada and North America. But because of the fresh water blocking this flow, this conveyor of salt water, warm tropical waters up through the North Sea, it's going to turn Europe and Great Britain into frozen tundra one of these days. In fact, according to Woodhull Oceanographic Institute, this is so serious, there could be an ice age within 8 years.
Within 8 years, and maybe even sooner than that. In fact, I'm holding a reprint of an article here from the Woodhull Oceanographic Institution, a very prestigious institution, and they are constantly researching currents, oceanic flow. Their reports are used by merchant seamen the world over. But they need to be able to predict weather, ocean currents, etc., for their Atlantic crossings, for crossings other parts of the sea. But I'm holding this article, which is entitled "Abrupt Climate Change, Should We Be Worried?" by Robert B. Gagosian of Woodhull Oceanographic Institution. And JR, it's talking about this very thing. The Ocean Conveyor takes water from the equator, which is very warm, The water there has been exposed to sunlight, which is causing the surface water to evaporate, become saltier and warmer. It flows up through the Bahamas along the east coast of the United States and then turns northeast across Greenland and Iceland. And that warm, salty water reaches England and Europe, and Scandinavia, by the way. And there, it releases its heat, and because it's very dense, salty water, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, flows back to the equator, and the whole cycle starts all over again. Well, because of the freshening water, really since the 1960s, this has been observed. Because of the freshening water in the North Atlantic, the global conveyor is slowing down. Now, JR, you got to think about this. England is on the same latitude as Labrador. And Labrador is very, very cold. I mean, it has tundra in parts of its topography. The experts are saying that if the global conveyor stops, England will become frozen tundra. No farming possible, no farming in Norway, Sweden, Finland, no summer season, no vegetable crops. Northern Europe would become a frozen wasteland. And this condition, once it happens, will last for several decades. The implications of this are huge.
In fact, it could produce problems with agriculture in North America.
Absolutely.
And can you imagine with frozen tundra everywhere across Europe, across Russia, across Canada, across northern United States, no telling how far south it might go. A lot of these European and maybe even the United States people are going to be wanting to move south. And so it's possible that Africa could be taken over by Europeans, or the Middle East, or even Mexico and South America could become more populated with Americans from the United States. Instead of all those folks south coming north, can you imagine everybody north going south? And it could create a tremendous upheaval in the world economy, in the distribution of food, and in the plan for world government.
Well, JR, what amazes me is when you stop and think about this, imagine for a moment that the infrastructures of Northern Europe are frozen. We're talking about natural gas. Electric power will be taxed to the maximum because there would never be a warm-up. People would be using electricity for heating. They'd be using gas. The water systems, which are just a few feet or a few inches below the surface, they're saying now, if this happened, it would freeze up the water systems. People would have no fresh water. The electricity would be at a premium. There would be no fresh food, no summer truck gardens in France, in Germany. And they grow a lot of summer produce, even in Scandinavia. That would stop. People would be starved. They would be freezing in the dark. And JR, can you imagine the political ramifications of this? These things cause wars.
Mm-hmm. You know, 1,000 years ago, Greenland was very mild, evidently, and the Norse people settled many communities in Greenland, but today those same ancient cities are now under 500 feet of ice.
They're under 500 feet of ice. Already Greenland has experienced the kind of the cooling that we're talking about for all of Europe. I want to read for a moment from 2 Peter, because there's an important point to be made, and that is this. Peter says in 2 Peter 3:3, knowing this first, that there shall come out in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts and saying, where's the promise of his coming? Well, in this context, Peter goes on to say in verse 5, for this they are willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old in the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. Now he's talking about the flood of Noah. Mm-hmm. That catastrophic flood released stratospheric sub-freezing temperatures. It created the polar caps, and that was, 4,500 years ago. Ever since that time, those polar caps have been diminishing. And today we're seeing the last remnants of the old ice age, quote unquote, that was precipitated by the flood of Noah. Geologists today deny that there ever was a flood of Noah.
Yes.
And so they have come up with this global warming motif to explain what they're seeing.
They're blaming greenhouse gases.
Yes.
They're blaming automobiles and factories and pollution of all kinds, freon, and so on. But the truth of the matter is, they're just simply denying that there was a flood, and the world been warming up ever since the flood was over.
That's right.
Fascinating.
It is.
Now, if you'll notice, most of the land masses of this world are above the equator, on the north side of the planet.
Yes.
So if we have a global warming on the north side of the planet, it's going to tremendously affect population growth and population centers. Well, we'll talk about that more when we come back in just a moment. Gary Stearman has written an article for our March edition of our magazine, Prophecy in the News, called The Big Freeze. Gary, you have a globe there. Show us how the ocean conveys this water.
J.R., this is most fascinating, and we have to remember that the basic premise is that water creates climate on our planet. We're talking about the global conveyor beginning with superheated water, salty water that flows up past the east coast of the United States, past Nova Scotia, and from there it turns northeast, flows past Greenland, Iceland, and then through the straits where the Faroe Islands are located. It warms the United Kingdom, it warms Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, and by the way, the global conveyor even has implications as far east as the breadbasket of Russia, where they grow grain. Now, the conveyor works by circulating water clockwise around the Atlantic basin. The water, having dropped its heat up here, then flows back to the equator for another cycle. But JR, what's fascinating is that England, right here, is on the same latitude as Newfoundland and Labrador. Here's Goose Bay, Labrador. Everybody knows Goose Bay, Labrador is permafrost. It's a place you can't grow crops. And if you go straight to the east, you come to Edinburgh, Scotland, where they now are able to grow crops. If the global conveyor stopped, so would crops stop in England.
And if you'll notice, most of the countries there are above the equator. Go ahead and point that out. Go
Yes.
around the globe and show us where most of the world lives today.
That's right. Going east from the United States, we find that we're on the same level, basically, as North Africa in the United States. And the land masses that you find on the globe are north of the equator. Russia, Mongolia, China, India, all of this land, most of the land mass is north of the equator, including the United States. And so the implications of this will affect the entire northern hemisphere, JR. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute is telling us that we could see drought in the United States. Even if we didn't see massive cooling, we could see crippling droughts in the breadbasket of the United States.
And according to Peter, in the last days, there would be people who would be denying that there was a flood.
Yes.
And figuring out some reason why the world's in the shape that it's in. That's a fulfillment of the prophecy in Peter.
Absolutely.
And then let's go over to Job, Gary, and tell us about the prophecy you found there in Job about this.
Now, this is most interesting because the Lord is talking to Job and explaining to Job that how far above his understanding the natural world and the functions of the natural world happen to be. And he says in Job 38:16, "Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea?" What's a rhetorical question. Of course Job hasn't. Or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? In other words, God's saying, I understand the ocean currents.
The conveyor of the ocean.
The conveyor of the ocean.
And how the salt water is conveyed down deep.
Yes.
And moves the mild climate temperatures up toward the north.
Right.
Fascinating. That's what God is talking to Job about.
He's explaining to Job, I control the natural systems. And then in Job 38:22 and 23, we find something interesting. He asks Job, hast thou entered into the treasuries of the snow? It's treasures in the King James. It means treasuries, really. Or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? Now, that's really fascinating, isn't it, J.R.?
We're talking end time here.
End time.
In fact, chapter 38 of Job is an end times prophecy. Job is talking to God, and God is telling him of various things that Job doesn't understand that will come to pass in the last days. For example, he says here in verse 13 that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. That's the end of days, you see, when the Lord judges the wicked. And in fact, in the Hebrew, the word wicked here has the little letter ayin, which is raised up above the level of the line. And then on the next verse, it is turned as clay to the seal. And verse 15, and from the wicked their light is withholden. So again, for the second time, the ayin is lifted up in the word wicked, showing that God is going to snatch the wicked out of this world, going to get rid of them and create a world government with the Messiah as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
And so in this setting, the Lord asks Job, have you seen my treasuries of snow? Have you seen my treasuries of hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble? Jared, that's the time of Jacob's trouble. That's the great tribulation, suggesting that there may be a massive cold event that precipitates some of the events of the tribulation. Now that is worth talking about.
So let's talk about Russia now. And if Russia and Europe were to get into this trouble, they would want to find some warm weather further south, wouldn't they?
J.R., if this happened, we're looking at Oslo, Norway. We're looking at Sweden. We're looking at Denmark, Scotland, Ireland, Britain. We're looking at France and Germany. All of these countries would suddenly lose their ability to grow crops. There would be starvation. There'd have to be a massive movement just to keep these people alive. And then moving on eastward into Russia, the breadbasket of Russia would fail. The wheatlands, which are already marginal because of the climate there, if it turns just a tiny bit colder, they can't grow wheat. J.R., I believe that could precipitate a geopolitical revolution. I think these people might even get their heads together and say, you know, we need to do something about this. We need to move south where it's warmer so that we can feed our people.
Well, if the cities are under 500 feet of ice, they wouldn't have any choice.
That's right.
They would have to move south. And of course, even the farmland of Northern America, the great wheat breadbasket of America, which supplies most of the world, I guess, with wheat, would greatly be curtailed if this happens. And according to Woodhull Institute, they're a very prestigious group.
Yes.
They're the people, you know, who sent the robot down to take pictures of the Titanic wreckage at the bottom of the North Sea. And they are saying that since 1960, they have noticed and have charted this freshening of the water, and they have graphs and charts that show that it is definitely getting colder and colder and colder because of this, and the fresh water is just flooding the North Sea and the northern Atlantic. And indeed, they claim that within the next 8 years, the world is going to face an ice age.
And by the way, they speak of a phenomenon called the flip. Just the word flip, F-L-I-P, in which they've been watching the graphs generally decline on a more or less steady downward trend. They're saying that when conditions reach a certain point, the climate could flip like a light switch. And within literally weeks, what we're talking about could happen. And JR, when I read Ezekiel 38, I have new eyes to understand this, because here is Gog, Russia, with an evil thought saying, we're going to go to the south, and we're going to ally ourselves with Persia, Ethiopia, Libya. These are countries to the south. Gomer, which is the Germanic people with all his bands, the house of Togarma of the north quarters. And JR, they all come from the north parts and they go south. And you know, students of Bible prophecy have asked for years, what is the precipitating factor that causes Gog to move southward. Well, maybe we have a clue now.
Indeed. You know, when you go to the most southern part of the Soviet Union, it's still above the Great Lakes.
Yes, absolutely.
And so the Soviet Union, you know, even though it's a great landmass, is mostly frozen tundra. It's up there with the Hudson Bay and with Alaska.
In just the concluding seconds, I want to reiterate something. People at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution are the most prestigious climatologists on the face of the earth. And when they suggest things like this, it's not to be taken lightly.
It's entirely possible then that within the next few years, as the world moves toward world government, that they will be have an impetus there because of the climate dropping severely. We're talking frozen tundra here in Europe. So
yes.
Keep your eyes on the news and find out what's happening. We'll be back in just a moment. You know, Gary, our government has been discussing opening up the borders all the way from Canada to Argentina and forming a new government of the Western Hemisphere similar to the European Union. In fact, a legislation called the FTAA, Free Trade Area of the Americas, is proposing this, and it could become law within the next year or so. And this may be one of the reasons, because we're looking south.
Yes, indeed. And could it be that our experts are already thinking ahead and hoping that we can move to warmer climes? Well, stay tuned.
I tell you, Jesus is coming soon. The world cannot continue as it is today. Dramatic things are happening.
Yes.
And if you want to have eternal life, you need to trust in Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stimmen. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.